The invitation to Sunday dinner arrived unexpectedly, printed on her mother's delicate floral stationery as if it were a peace offering. Dr. Nadia Lawson stared at it for several minutes before placing it on her kitchen counter. It had been months since her parents had reached out, ever since she refused to loan them $50,000 for her sister Clara's extravagant destination wedding. That single word, no, had shattered what was left of their family harmony. Her brother David had called her selfish, insisting she owed their parents for investing in her education. What he never mentioned was that she had worked 3 jobs through medical school while they funded his failed ventures. Still, the tone of her mother's letter, gentle yet urgent, made her uneasy. After 15 years as an emergency surgeon, Nadia had learned to sense danger before it struck. This dinner felt like the calm before a storm. The Lawson house stood exactly as she remembered, grand but tired, with a manicured lawn that masked the emotional decay inside. Nadia parked her modest gray Honda Civic by the curb. She had learned long ago not to flaunt success around her family. The last time she'd driven her Mercedes there, it had sparked a 3-hour lecture about sharing her blessings. Her siblings' cars gleamed in the driveway, Clara's white BMW and David's black Audi, both bought with borrowed money. As she approached the door, her mother's voice rang out with forced warmth. "Nadia, sweetheart, you're finally here. Everyone's waiting." The sweetness in her tone only deepened Nadia's suspicion. The dining room shimmered with polished silverware and her mother's best china. A roast chicken, perfectly browned, sat at the center of the table, a dish Grace Lawson reserved for occasions when she wanted something. Her father, Henry, sat at the head of the table, a manila envelope by his plate. Clara and David flanked him, both wearing identical smirks. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Clara said, crossing her arms. Nadia smiled politely and took her seat. "Thanks for inviting me, Mom," she said evenly. "What's the occasion?" Her father cleared his throat. "Can't parents want to have dinner with their daughter?" he asked, though his hand never left the envelope. Dinner began with forced laughter and empty compliments. Grace asked about Nadia's hospital shifts but barely listened to the answers. David bragged about a new business in development, while Clara talked endlessly about her upcoming honeymoon. The air was thick with performance. Nadia sliced her chicken in silence, waiting for the real reason she'd been summoned. Finally, Henry set down his glass and folded his hands. "We need to discuss something important," he said, sliding the manila envelope toward her. Nadia's stomach tightened. "Your mother and I have been updating our will," he continued. "We've been thinking about our legacy." Grace leaned forward, her smile practiced. "We want to ensure our assets are distributed fairly," she said softly. "Given your financial position, it's clear you don't need an inheritance." Clara's smirk widened. "Yeah, Nadia, you're a doctor. You make plenty of money. It's only fair that the rest of us get some help." David nodded in solemn agreement, though his eyes glimmered with triumph. Henry adjusted his glasses. "So, we've decided everything. The house, savings, investments, will go to Clara and David." Nadia set down her fork, her face unreadable. "I see," she said quietly. "And what exactly do you expect from me?" Grace exhaled, as though Nadia's calmness was somehow inconvenient. "Nothing, dear. We just wanted to be honest." Clara twirled a strand of her glossy hair. "It's not like you need money. You refused to help with my wedding, remember?" Nadia turned her gaze on her sister. "Yes, I remember. Because it wasn't a wedding, it was a show you couldn't afford." The air thickened with silence. "You turned your back on the family," David muttered. Nadia leaned back in her chair, her voice steady. "No, David. I stopped letting the family use me." Henry's expression hardened. "That's enough. We've made our decision." He slid the will back toward himself. Grace placed a hand on his arm, whispering something under her breath. Nadia stood slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "All right," she said. "If that's how you feel, then don't expect a single cent from me either." Grace frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, Nadia replied. Don't call me for money. Don't call me for medical favors. Don't call me at all. You're being dramatic, Clara scoffed. You'd never turn your back on us. Nadia gave a small, cold smile. You'd be surprised what I'm capable of. She picked up her purse and walked to the door, pausing only once. You've made your choice, she said quietly. Now live with it. As the door clicked shut behind her, the house fell into uneasy silence. Grace turned to Henry, her face pale. Do you think she meant it? Henry shrugged, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. She'll come around. She always does. But for the first time, even he didn't sound convinced. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. Nadia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel as anger and sadness churned inside her. For years she had covered their debts, pulled strings to get the medical care, and shielded them from consequences. And now they had disinherited her because she was too successful. She started the engine, watching their silhouettes through the dining room window. 3 figures huddled together, laughing as if they'd won something. But storms, she knew, always came for those who thought they were safe. 3 weeks later the storm arrived. It began with a phone vibrating on her desk in the emergency department. 17 missed calls, she murmured. All from David. She ignored the 18th until her hospital's front desk buzzed her line. Dr. Lawson, said the nurse. Your brother's here. Severe abdominal pain. He's demanding to see you. Nadia inhaled slowly. I'm not available. Assign any qualified surgeon. There was a pause. He's having trouble arranging payment. He says you usually handle that. Nadia's voice didn't waver. Not anymore. Treat him like any other patient. David's surgery was straightforward. A routine appendectomy that any competent surgeon could perform. But without Nadia's influence, it came with a hefty price tag. $35,000. When the billing department asked for payment, David's face drained of color. His credit was ruined from failed business ventures, and their parents' finances were stretched thin. You can't do this to me, he shouted at the nurse. My sister's a doctor here. But when they paged Nadia again, her answer was simple. He's just another patient. For the first time, David faced consequences money, or family favoritism, couldn't erase. A week later, it was Clara's turn. On a skiing trip she couldn't afford, she tore a ligament in her knee. The hospital demanded payment up front before scheduling her surgery. Nadia's phone buzzed repeatedly with her sister's calls. The last voicemail came through with broken sobs. Nadia, please. The specialist won't see me without a deposit. Mom and Dad can't help because of David's bills. I know what we said at dinner, but I'm your sister. Nadia listened silently, then deleted the message. Some lessons, she thought, are best learned the hard way. 2 weeks later, the inevitable happened. At 3 a.m., Nadia's phone rang again. Her mother's voice trembled through the line. Nadia, it's your father. He's had a heart attack. Please, we need your help. The hospital says surgery will cost $150,000. They won't operate without arrangements. Nadia was already at the hospital. Her position as chief of emergency surgery meant she was alerted as soon as her father was admitted. She stood outside his room, watching him through the window, pale and fragile. You'll need Dr. Williams, she said. He's the best cardiac surgeon in the city. Grace's voice cracked. Please, whatever it takes. We'll fix the will. Just save him. Nadia's tone was calm but cold. This isn't about the will anymore, Mother. This is about years of taking me for granted. You saw me as a safety net, not as family. Grace sobbed into the phone. He's your father. And I'm your daughter, Nadia replied. The one you disinherited because she was successful. Silence hung heavy on the line. Finally, Grace whispered, there are other hospitals. Yes, Nadia said softly. But every good surgeon in this city knows me. They value my referrals. Good luck finding one who'll take a high-risk case without payment upfront. When she hung up, Nadia stayed at the observation window, watching as Grace rushed back into the room, desperation written all over her face. Clara stood in the corner, her mascara streaked from tears. David was pacing, muttering under his breath. A nurse approached Nadia quietly. "Dr. Lawson, your father's lab results are back. They're not good." Nadia nodded. "Thank you, Jenny. Make sure he receives standard care." The nurse frowned. "Not your usual premium instructions." "No," Nadia said firmly. "They made their choice. Now they live with it." Over the next 48 hours, the Lawson family unraveled. Without Nadia's silent protection, they were forced to face reality. Grace called distant relatives for loans. David pawned his Rolex. Clara listed her designer handbags online, her pride dissolving one sale at a time. Henry's condition worsened, and Dr. Williams, the cardiac specialist, found Nadia in the corridor. "You've never refused a family referral before," he said gently. Nadia didn't look up from her chart. "Sometimes," she murmured, "people need to understand the true cost of their choices." That evening, Nadia found her mother in the hospital chapel, sitting alone under the dim glow of stained glass. Grace looked up when she entered, eyes swollen, hands shaking. "We found a surgeon," she whispered. "At County General. The success rate isn't great, but it's all we can afford." Nadia sat beside her, keeping her tone professional. "For 15 years I've fixed every crisis this family's had. Every bill, every emergency, every mistake. Not because you were grateful, but because I thought that's what family meant." Grace's lip trembled. "We didn't know." "You knew," Nadia said quietly. "You just didn't care." Nadia's voice softened, but the pain underneath it was sharp. "Did you ever ask how my day was? How many lives I saved? How many nights I didn't sleep?" Grace's eyes filled with guilt. "No," she whispered. "I didn't." "Last month," Nadia continued, "I was offered the position of head of surgery at Mayo Clinic. I planned to tell you all during dinner, but instead you disinherited me." Grace's tears fell freely now. "We can change the will." Nadia stood, straightening her coat. "It's not about the will anymore. It's about respect." Nadia took a deep breath. "I've spoken to Dr. Williams. He'll take Dad's case, pro bono." Grace blinked in disbelief. "You'll still help us?" "Not because of your pleas or guilt," Nadia said. "Because I swore an oath to save lives. But from this point forward, things will change." Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. "What do you want us to do?" Nadia's gaze was steady. "You'll rebuild from the ground up. Clara gets a real job. David starts paying his own bills. And you and Dad, therapy every week." Grace hesitated. "And if we refuse?" Nadia's tone was unflinching. "Then Dad transfers to County General tomorrow, and you live with that choice." Minutes later, she stood beside Dr. Williams as her family signed the agreement her lawyer had prepared. Clara's hand shook as she signed her name. David stared at the floor. Henry's surgery went ahead the next morning. Nadia watched through the glass, arms folded, her expression unreadable. For the first time in years, she wasn't the family's savior. She was their mirror. The surgery took 6 hours. Every minute felt like a lifetime for the Lawson family. Grace paced the corridor, whispering silent prayers. Clara sat hunched over, her usual confidence stripped away, while David stared blankly at the floor, realizing for the first time how fragile everything was. Nadia stayed in the observation room, her face composed, her hands clasped behind her back. She didn't interfere. She simply watched. When Dr. Williams finally emerged, sweat glistening on his brow, he gave a tired smile. "The surgery was a success," he said. Relief rippled through the hallway. Grace burst into tears, clutching her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. But Dr. Williams shook his head. "Thank your daughter. She made it happen." In the days that followed, Nadia maintained her distance. She visited her father only as his doctor, not his daughter. Every conversation was professional. "Your vitals are improving, Mr. Lawson," she would say, adjusting his monitors. Henry's eyes followed her, guilt heavy in their depths. "Nadia," he began one afternoon. "I was wrong." She didn't look up. "Rest, Dad. The body heals best when it isn't talking." He smiled faintly at the irony but said no more. The silence between them was no longer angry. It was reflective, weighted with realization. Grace visited every day, bringing food that often went untouched. Clara arrived less frequently, still nursing her pride. David came only when his conscience nagged him. They were all changing in their own quiet ways, learning humility one uncomfortable step at a time. When Grace finally caught Nadia in the hallway, she said softly, "You were right." Nadia raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Everything," Grace whispered. "About family, respect, responsibility. We lost sight of what mattered." Nadia sighed. "You didn't lose sight, Mom. You just stopped looking." By the end of Henry's third week in recovery, things began to shift. Clara had started her first real job, an entry-level assistant role at a local insurance firm. She complained endlessly at first, but something in her tone changed when she received her first paycheck. "It feels good," she told Grace over dinner. "Like I earned something for once." David, meanwhile, sold his Audi and took up work with a logistics company, managing deliveries. For the first time, he showed up early and stayed late. Grace couldn't believe it. "They're finally growing up," she told Henry one morning. He smiled weakly. All it took was losing everything. Nadia didn't rush reconciliation. She watched from a respectful distance, waiting to see if the change would last. Occasionally, she'd receive a text from Clara asking for advice, not money, or a brief message from David, "Just got promoted." Each one brought a quiet satisfaction she didn't show. Grace, however, kept trying. She sent messages every few days, small gestures of care. "Dinner's ready if you want to stop by," or "Your father asked about you." Nadia often ignored them, but one Sunday, she found herself driving toward her parents' house without planning to. When she arrived, Grace opened the door, her eyes full of hope and hesitation. "You came," she said softly. Nadia nodded, glancing around the familiar living room. It looked different, not in decoration but in atmosphere. For the first time it felt sincere. The television was off, the dinner table was modest, and there was no envelope waiting in sight. "We weren't sure you'd accept," Grace said. "We made chicken stew, your favorite." Nadia smiled faintly. "Only when you're trying to ask for something." Grace laughed nervously. "Not this time." Dinner that night was quiet but genuine. There was no pretense, no performance. Clara shared stories from her job, laughing about her mistakes. David talked about saving for a used car. Henry, still weak but recovering, looked at his children with new eyes. "I used to think success was about what you leave behind," he said slowly. "But maybe it's about what you build while you're still here." Nadia glanced at him, her expression softening. For the first time in years, she saw sincerity instead of entitlement. After dinner, Grace brought out a stack of papers. Nadia tensed slightly until she realized they weren't financial documents. They were therapy forms, signed by both parents. "We've been going every week," Grace said. "It's uncomfortable but necessary." Nadia nodded approvingly. "That's progress." Henry cleared his throat. "We've also rewritten the will," he said. "Everything's equal now." Nadia smiled gently. "That's good to hear, but it doesn't matter anymore." Grace frowned. "Of course it does." "No," Nadia said softly. "What matters is that you've learned." The following months brought quiet healing. Nadia accepted the position at Mayo Clinic, and when the hospital held her appointment ceremony, her family attended together. The old tensions weren't gone, but they had transformed into something more honest. Clara wore an off-the-rack dress and a genuine smile. David's tie was simple but neat. Grace and Henry looked older, humbled by time and choices but proud. During the event, a photographer asked for a family photo. As they posed, Grace squeezed Nadia's hand. "We're proud of you," she whispered. "Not because of your title. Because you never gave up on us." The framed photograph now hangs in her parents' living room, a reminder of the storm they survived. In it, Nadia stands tall in her white coat, no longer just the family doctor or provider, but a woman who rebuilt her boundaries and, in doing so, rebuilt her family. The will sits forgotten in a drawer. What remains instead is something no document could replace: mutual respect earned the hard way. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but wisdom born from pain. Nadia learned that lesson first. Her family learned it last. But they learned it together, and that made all the difference. 6 months after her father's surgery, life in the Lawson family had settled into a quiet rhythm. Clara called Nadia every Sunday, no longer to complain, but to ask for advice on budgeting or work. David had started a small, legitimate delivery business, driving an old van he'd bought with his savings. Grace volunteered at the local clinic on weekends, greeting patients with a humility she never used to show. Henry, though still regaining his strength, took up gardening. "It helps me think," he said one afternoon, trimming the hedges, "about how easily we almost lost everything." Nadia smiled. Sometimes losing everything is the best teacher. One evening, Clara stopped by Nadia's apartment with takeout. "You won't believe this," she said, setting down 2 boxes of noodles. "I just got promoted." Nadia raised an eyebrow. "Already? That's fast." Clara grinned. "I worked for it. I stayed late, helped clients, even learned Excel properly." Nadia laughed. Miracles do happen. They ate in companionable silence until Clara spoke again, her tone quieter. "I never understood how hard you worked. I used to think you were just lucky." Nadia looked at her sister thoughtfully. "Luck doesn't survive sleepless nights, Clara. Discipline does." Meanwhile, David faced his own reckoning. One afternoon, he came to the hospital where Nadia worked, nervously holding an envelope. "I came to pay my last installment," he said. "For my surgery bill." Nadia blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said firmly. "It's the first thing I've ever finished without asking for help." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I thought money made someone strong. Turns out it's character." Nadia smiled faintly. "Then you've finally grown up, little brother." Grace and Henry's therapy sessions began to transform their marriage. They learned to talk without shouting, to listen without interrupting, to forgive without expecting something in return. For the first time, Grace admitted her fear of being left behind by her successful daughter. "I thought if you didn't need us," she told Henry, "then maybe you didn't love us." Henry sighed. "We all measured love wrong. We thought it was money, attention, or control. But it's respect." That night they called Nadia just to say, "We love you." No conditions. No favors. Just love. At the hospital, Nadia earned the admiration of her colleagues for her leadership and precision. Younger doctors sought her mentorship, often amazed by her calm under pressure. Yet, outside the operating room, she remained humble. "You don't need to shout to be respected," she told a new intern one day. "You just need to do your job with integrity." When she wasn't working, she spent her evenings reading, sometimes visiting her parents for quiet dinners that no longer felt like negotiations. Each visit healed another old wound. One Sunday, during lunch at her parents' house, Henry handed her a small velvet box. "Before your mother and I updated the will again, we wanted you to have this." Nadia opened it to find her grandmother's old locket, engraved with delicate initials. "She always said it should go to the one who carried the family's heart," Henry said softly. Nadia traced the edges of the locket with her thumb. "I don't know if I deserve this." Grace smiled. "You earned it, not with money but with strength." Clara and David watched quietly from across the table. Clara leaned over. "You know, it feels strange not to fight during family dinners." David chuckled. "It's peaceful." Kind of boring but peaceful. They all laughed, and for once, the sound wasn't strained. Nadia glanced around the table, at her sister, her brother, her parents, and realized this was the family she'd wanted all along. Imperfect, yes, but finally genuine. To new beginnings, Henry said, raising his glass. To growth, Nadia added. And to finally learning the value of peace, Grace whispered. After lunch, Nadia and Grace sat in the garden, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the trees. You were right about boundaries, Grace said, looking into the distance. I used to think love meant giving everything. But sometimes it means saying no. Nadia nodded. Boundaries aren't walls, Mom. They're doors with locks you control. You choose when to open them. Grace smiled faintly. And thank you for not locking us out forever. Nadia chuckled. You got lucky. Most people don't get second chances. Years later, when Nadia's story spread among younger doctors, they often spoke about her quiet resilience and unshakable discipline. Few knew the storms she'd weathered to build that calm. At home, her family flourished in modest ways. Clara married a kind man she met through work. David expanded his logistics company and began hiring people who reminded him of his younger self. Lost, hopeful, and trying to start over. Grace and Henry grew old together, content and proud. They had learned that love wasn't about dependency but about standing side by side. On the evening of Henry's 70th birthday, the entire Lawson family gathered again, this time without pretense or expectation. The dining room glowed softly with candles, laughter replacing old resentments. Clara gave a toast, her eyes shining. To Dad, for teaching us that love is stronger than pride. To Mom, for showing us humility. And to Nadia, for reminding us that respect is the truest form of love. As applause filled the room, Nadia felt something rare, a peace that comes only after years of storms. For the first time in her life, she truly felt home. The celebration that night was small but heartfelt. The walls of the Lawson home, once echoing with arguments and guilt, now held laughter and gratitude. Henry looked at his daughter across the table. I used to think being a father meant controlling everything, he said with a wistful smile. But you taught me that being a parent means trusting what you've raised. Nadia reached over, placing her hand gently on his. You taught me too, Dad. You taught me what strength looks like when pride finally steps aside. He chuckled softly. That took a while, didn't it? A lifetime, she replied, smiling. After dinner, Clara and David helped their parents clean up while Nadia stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool, fragrant with gardenia and damp grass. She gazed at the stars above, bright and distant, yet strangely comforting. So much of her life had been spent fixing, rescuing, and proving herself. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to save anyone. Grace joined her outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. You know, she said, there was a time I thought you'd never speak to us again. Nadia's lips curved slightly. There was a time I almost didn't. Grace sighed, her eyes shimmering in the moonlight. You were right to walk away, Nadia. If you hadn't, we would have never changed. Nadia looked at her mother with a mixture of pride and tenderness. Walking away wasn't easy, Mom. Hurt. But sometimes distance is the only medicine that heals. Grace nodded. And forgiveness. Nadia thought for a moment. Forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's remembering without letting it poison you. Grace smiled sadly. You sound just like your grandmother. Nadia laughed quietly. She was wiser than all of us. When the guests left and the house grew quiet, Nadia wandered into her father's study. On his desk sat a photo frame, their new family portrait from her Mayo Clinic ceremony. She traced it with her finger, noticing the subtle changes, the genuine smiles, the softness in her parents' eyes, the way her siblings stood closer to her than before. Henry entered silently, leaning against the doorframe. You saved us, you know, he said. Nadia turned. No, Dad. I just stopped saving you long enough for you to save yourselves. His eyes glistened. Either way, you brought us back. The following morning, Nadia returned to the hospital early. The smell of disinfectant and coffee greeted her like an old friend. "Morning, Dr. Lawson," her assistant called out. "You've got a full schedule." Nadia smiled. "What's new?" She slipped into her white coat, the familiar weight grounding her. In every room she entered, she carried not just medical expertise but the wisdom of boundaries and compassion. When a young nurse asked her once how she managed to stay so calm, Nadia replied, "Because I've seen what chaos costs when you never say no." That afternoon, she visited the children's ward. A little girl named Ava had been struggling with post-surgery fear, refusing to sleep alone. Nadia sat by her bed, holding her small hand. "Do you know what bravery is, Ava?" she asked gently. The child shook her head. "It's doing the hard thing even when you're scared," Ava whispered. "Like you." Nadia smiled softly. "Exactly like me. But you know what? I still get scared too. We just don't let fear stop us." The girl nodded slowly, finally closing her eyes. Moments like that reminded Nadia why she had chosen this path. When evening came, she returned home to find a small envelope waiting at her door. Inside was a handwritten note from Grace. "No amount of money can ever repay what you've taught us. You gave us something we never knew we were missing. Dignity." Beneath it lay a single photograph. The family sitting together in the garden, laughing. Nadia held it to her chest for a long time before placing it on her mantel beside her grandmother's locket. She didn't cry. She just breathed, steady and full, knowing peace had finally found her. Weeks passed, and life settled into rhythm again. Nadia's name began appearing in medical journals, cited for her groundbreaking trauma research. Yet despite her growing fame, she never let success harden her. She answered every call from her family now, not because they needed her, but because they'd learned to speak with respect. Grace often called just to share recipes. Clara sent voice notes filled with laughter. David occasionally stopped by with flowers from the market. They had learned that love wasn't about taking, it was about showing up. One Sunday morning, Henry surprised everyone by planting a small tree in the backyard. "It's a Lawson maple," he declared proudly. "Strong roots, steady growth, and shade for those who come after us." Clara giggled. "You and your symbolism, Dad." He winked. "Well, someone has to be poetic in this family." Nadia stood beside him, touching the fragile leaves. "It's beautiful," she said. "It'll take time to grow." "So did we," Grace murmured, slipping her arm through Henry's. They all stood there for a while, the sunlight spilling through the branches like a quiet blessing. Later that evening, Nadia wrote in her journal, a habit she'd recently taken up. "For years I thought strength meant never needing anyone. Now I know it means standing tall without stepping on others. Family isn't who never hurts you, it's who learns from the hurt." She closed the book, gazing at the photograph on her shelf. In the image, no one was perfect, but everyone was whole. The woman who once walked away from her family now walked beside them, her heart lighter than it had ever been. Sometimes, she thought, healing doesn't roar, it whispers. Months turned into a year, and Nadia's life found a beautiful balance between purpose and peace. The hospital flourished under her leadership. Her team admired not just her skill, but her empathy. Outside of work, she became the anchor her family once expected her to be. But this time by choice, not obligation. Grace often said, "You've become the heart of this family," to which Nadia always replied with a gentle smile, "No, Mom. I just stopped letting my heart be taken for granted." The words lingered, not as bitterness, but as quiet wisdom they all lived by. One spring afternoon, Clara visited with exciting news. "I've been offered a managerial position," she announced, practically glowing. Nadia hugged her tightly. "You earned it," she said. "No shortcuts this time." Clara laughed. "Guess I'm finally growing up, huh?" Nadia smiled. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be." That same evening, David arrived carrying homemade dinner. "Don't faint," he teased. "But I cooked." Grace and Henry joined soon after, and for the first time in decades, they all sat around the table simply to enjoy being together. No hidden motives, no unspoken debts. During dessert, Henry lifted his glass. "To Nadia," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for teaching us that strength isn't about power. It's about love with discipline." The room fell quiet. Nadia looked around, meeting each of their eyes. "No," she said softly. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us learning to respect each other. Families fall apart when gratitude disappears." Grace reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "And ours came back together because of you." Nadia blinked away the tears threatening to fall. "Then maybe this time we'll stay that way." As the months went on, Nadia's reputation reached new heights. She was invited to medical conferences around the world, often speaking about leadership, empathy, and moral integrity in medicine. Reporters asked how she balanced success with humility, and her answer was always the same: "I learned it at home, the hard way." At every event, she wore her grandmother's locket. It reminded her that even the strongest hearts need forgiveness to stay soft. And though she rarely spoke about her family's past, those who knew her could feel the story in her steadiness. Back home, the Lawson family transformed their old house into something more than just a place to live. Grace started hosting small dinners for neighbors struggling with family conflict, sharing her experience with honesty. "It's never too late to rebuild," she'd tell them. Henry, now fully recovered, offered to mentor young fathers in the community, teaching them that pride destroys faster than poverty. Clara began volunteering at youth programs, helping girls learn financial independence. And David donated to a hospital fund, under Nadia's name, calling it the Boundary Project. "To remind people," he said, "that love without limits turns into burden." On the first anniversary of Henry's surgery, the family gathered once again, but this time the celebration was simple. They planted flowers around the Lawson maple tree, which had already grown taller and stronger than anyone expected. Nadia stood quietly, her hands buried in the soil beside her siblings. "Funny," Clara said. "A year ago, this garden was just grass." Nadia smiled. "So were we." They laughed, but beneath the laughter was gratitude, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud because everyone already feels it. That evening, Grace found Nadia sitting alone on the porch, the sky painted in gold and purple hues. "You're quiet," Grace said softly. "Just thinking," Nadia replied. "About how different everything is." Grace sat beside her. "You changed us, Nadia. You gave us a second chance." Nadia shook her head. "You gave yourselves that. I just stopped cushioning your fall." Grace smiled. "Still, thank you for letting us rise again." They watched the horizon in silence, two women who had once stood on opposite sides of pride, now sharing peace. Later that week, a young resident at the hospital asked Nadia, "Dr. Lawson, what's the most important lesson life has taught you?" Nadia paused, her thoughts drifting to that long-ago dinner table where betrayal had once sat beside her. Then she smiled. "That boundaries don't destroy love, they protect it. And that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength with perspective." The resident nodded, scribbling notes. Nadia chuckled. "You won't find that in textbooks. You learn it by living." As the years passed, the Lawson family continued to thrive, not in wealth but in warmth. Clara